Hello everyone. Let me adjust this and see if I can. It is what it is. As I prepare to do the next two videos, astrology related videos that are, I believe, two of the more important videos I'm going to do this year. There is one video on astrology fundamentals, this one that I would like to get out of the way. Some of the content in this is people who've been following my videos will be familiar with some of the content in this video. I am trying to create one video on new moons, full moons, and eclipses. This is the one that I can have on my channel and use it as a resource so that in future when I talk about new moons, full moons, and eclipses, I don't have to cover the basics every single time. If someone were to ask me and say, if someone were to say, prove to me that astrology works, I would refer them to three things. First and foremost, I would refer them to the Mercury retrograde cycle and talk to them about how Mercury retrograde affects us all and ask them to observe the days around when Mercury is going retrograde or direct, or indeed the 3-week period when Mercury is retrograde, and take it for a walk 4 or 5 times, or test it for 2 years, or just see what Mercury goes retrograde every 3 months or so. See whether whatever it is that we describe as the effects of Mercury being retrograde hold true for them or not. Part of the reason why Mercury retrograde has become such a I'm so sorry. I keep trying to adjust this camera. I want to lower it, but it's not going to lower right now. Let me continue. Part of the reason why Mercury retrograde has sort of entered common vocabulary is because I think it resonates, irrespective. So that would be number one. Number two, and this is more important, I would say to anyone, adjust to and pay attention to the lunar cycles, new moons and full moons, and think about the time period between a new moon and the next new moon as one discrete cycle. Indeed, the word month is derived from the word moon. I don't know whether I would use the word derived, share the same root. The idea is it's about 28 days from one new moon to another, divided into 4 weeks of 7 days each. Each day is given the name of a planet. Planetary influences and astrological influences go back a long time, and we are now used to the solar Gregorian calendar, with months being 30 to 31 days long, with the exception of February. It's all timed around the amount of time it takes for the Earth to go around the Sun, and that has its place. But if someone were to say, prove to me that astrology works, I would say align with, and before aligning with, test and see what the lunar calendar and the lunar month feels like for you. And I would define a lunar month as one new moon to the next new moon. Energetically, certainly, I did my last video about birth charts. If you know where the new moons and full moons are following in your birth chart, see what effect or impact they're having based on where they're occurring. And the moon, astrologically, stands for our feelings, our emotions, our reactions, our intuition. And I would say where we are spending some of our time energetically. Energetically is a strange word to use astrologically because a lot of people would attribute it to the planet Mars. But I find that wherever the moon is, in whatever sector of the part, every chart is divided into 12 houses, as I explained last time, and it takes the moon roughly 2.5 days to go over each house. And wherever the moon is at any given time is where a lot of my life plays out during those 2.5 days, and I can't make that up. You don't have to have your birth chart in front of you and to know and understand it and know where the moon is to really get proof of astrology. I would just say for a year or 2 years, just see where the new moons are occurring, and not even that. I would say just pay attention to the new moons and the full moons and the new moons and the full moons and new moons and full moons, and see what is happening to you energetically. As I've explained in videos before, from where we stand or sit or are on planet Earth, it looks to us as if the moon and the sun meet up at the time of a new moon, and at the time of the full moon, the moon is opposite the sun. This is not hard to understand necessarily, because when The moon reflects the light of the sun. The moon has no light of its own. And so as the moon gets closer and closer to the sun, as we see more and more of the dark side of the moon, because it would be the sun, it would be the moon and earth, and as a result of which we're seeing the back side of the moon or the dark side of the moon, to us it appears as if the moon is disappearing, right? Because less and less of it from where we sit is reflecting sunlight. So at the time of the new moon, it looks to us like the sun and the moon come together. The moon loses all its light. It burns off the previous cycle. At the time of a new moon, it starts a new lunar month. As the moon starts to separate from the sun to go around the earth, it gets further and further from the sun, and as a result of which we see more and more sunlight reflected on its face. So the moon looks like it is waxing, it is getting bigger. And at the time of the full moon, it's the sun, the earth, and the moon. The moon is right opposite the sun, so from where we sit, we see the entire disk of the moon illuminated and then back around again. Energetically, a new moon is the start of a new lunar month, and after a new moon, we feel a rush or a sense of something expanding, an influx of energy, an influx of inspiration, an inspiration of energy, a breathing in, inspire, inspiration, and let's get going. And until we get to the full moon, the energy and the pace expands and increases. And indeed, by the time of the full moon, it was not unusual for the pace to become truly quite fast and emotionally for things to reach some sort of a peak. It could be that events reach culmination at the time of a full moon, an offer comes through, something is signed, something gets completed. Or it could be that at a time around the full moon, our emotional lives really become full and affected by the pace at which things are happening and going through, and we have some sort of a meltdown. If the moon stands for our emotional life, and really our emotional life drives a lot of what it is that we're trying to do. Our unconscious emotions, our intuition, our subconscious motivations, our emotional life, because what we're trying to do constantly is seek emotional satisfaction and fulfillment and stability. So if we're feeling emotionally motivated, I'll use that word, or unstable, we seek to complete tasks and go about doing them in such a way that it might satisfy us emotionally. And depending on where your moon is in your birth chart, some people like a lot of energy and do it in a very social way, and some people like to do things in kind of a plodding, quiet way. You know, the way we work also and the way we approach our lives. We are very sun sign based, and the sun is given a lot of importance in Western astrology, but a lot of other astrological systems give priority to the moon. And I think they're right. The sun is important, but not, the sun is important, no question, but it's not as important as the moon on a day-to-day basis. The moon was put there for a reason. And the more we examine how things are designed and how things happen, it's easier to believe that the earth and the sun have the relationship that they do based on chance and probability. But when you start to factor in the moon, it all becomes a little kooky. It all becomes a little spooky. It all becomes like someone placed that there. It's too calculated for it to be chance, I feel, anyway. Irrespective whether that resonates for you or it doesn't. We just had a new moon on June the 3rd in the sign of Gemini a few days ago, and have things since that time been increasing. By the time we get to the full moon, things will get to a slightly more high-pitched or slightly manic phase, or there might be a meltdown, or someone may have a tantrum, or there are tears, or sometimes there's bleeding, cuts, nosebleeds, an increase in energetic activity, fluids, sexual activity. And as I said, on the positive side, around the time of a full moon, things either come to completion, or you could be pushed into the limelight. Think of the moon becoming a spotlight in some way, or else yours or somebody else's emotional cauldron or pot overflows and some sort of truth is revealed. With the moon, there's something about the moon, and there's something about There's something about the moon and how much of it is hidden and how much of it is revealed that also gives us a sense of how much it is that we feel we have knowledge of or control of, or an emotional understanding or an intuitive understanding of a situation, how much we don't. As the moon heads towards the new moon and becomes smaller and smaller and smaller, and indeed the 48 to 72 hours before a new moon, our energy can flag and we are completing the last cycle, and the last 24 to 48 hours before a new moon are always slow, sluggish, and that's, if you would say, convince me about astrology, I would say, when is the next new moon happening? And pay attention to the 48 hours before and the 48 hours after, and you tell me if there isn't an energetic shift. And just observe this cycle from new moon to full moon to new moon to full moon back again for a year, for 2 years, and see whether that alignment makes sense to you. I really feel that for a lot of people, once you get in touch with that alignment, you can't go back to what you knew or didn't know. Now. Why am I deciding to do this right now? Because the next 2 videos that I'm going to do are going to be related to the eclipses that are coming up. The next new moon on July the 2nd is an eclipse. 4 times a year, or twice a year if you want to look at it that way, we have a new moon and a full moon that are eclipses. At the time of an eclipse, the Earth, the Moon, and the Sun line up in such a way that shadows fall on each other. That's the best way I can explain it. They line up in such a way, in the technical word is that they're aligned on the ecliptic, but the bottom line is they line up in such a way that they are practically linearly aligned. At the time of a new moon solar eclipse, from where we sit on planet Earth, the moon and the sun are so in a straight line that the moon, as it crosses over the sun, blocks out of the sun and creates a solar eclipse. And if you've seen pictures of solar eclipses, when that moon gets in front of the sun, I mean, it's not like a little part of the sun. The sun is eclipsed by the moon, except for a tiny sliver of light right around it. It is as if it was designed anyway. And then at the time of a lunar eclipse, you have the Earth, the sun, and the moon, and they're aligned in such a way that the Earth's shadow falls on the moon, and as a result of which the moon turns reddish. It's as if a shadow falls on the moon, because that's exactly what's happening, literally. Eclipses are the most important astrological events in a year. I'm not the only astrologer who says that. And if you were to say, is there one thing in any given year, Abhi, astrologically, that I need to know? I would say, yes, you need to know where the eclipses are falling in your chart. Because that is where a lot of your life is going to be played out. No question. No question. No question. And the eclipses right now happening on the Cancer-Capricorn polarity axis. So we have a new moon solar eclipse on July the 2nd in Cancer. Another interesting way to explain it is January the 5th of this year we had the solar eclipse in Capricorn, and on July the 16th we're going to have a lunar eclipse in Capricorn, 1 6-month cycle. I'm going to talk about the eclipses in a separate video with regard to what they mean and all that kind of stuff, but eclipses really have a fated quality. It's as if we can't, the way I like to put it is God takes the wheel when it comes to eclipses. The other thing is, I've said to you about eclipses, and this isn't true of regular new moons and full moons, is that with eclipses I find that the 2-month anniversary of an eclipse somehow resonates with the eclipse quite powerfully. Now the 2-month anniversary is going to fall around a new moon or a full moon anyway, because if you have the new moon solar eclipse on January the 5th, 2 months after, it's going to be pretty close to 2 new moons after. Irrespective, the 2 months after a solar eclipse, that date, and the 2 months before the lunar eclipse, that date, somehow are tuning forks for the eclipse cycle. And we have a lunar eclipse on July the 16th, and that is why I said the week before and after made, and it's not the entire period, it really is around that date. It's the week before and the week after. I will always say look to the week before, week after, not much wider than that. I hope that this is helping you get a sense of sort of some general astrological fundamentals. What are new moons? What are full moons? Why are they important and why are they helpful and what do we look for in them? The sun enters the part of the chart where a new moon occurs before a new moon occurs, because the sun has to be in that part of the chart for the moon to meet up with it. So from the time that the sun enters the place, the part of the chart where the next new moon is going to occur, to the new moon, there's a subconscious building up of laying the foundation for what that new moon is going to bring. And then the new moon occurs, and while some people would say, well, a month starts when the sun enters a particular sign and then ends when it leaves that sign, around the 20th to 23rd of each month, I would say the sun enters the sign and the month associated with that house and that sign really starts when that new moon occurs. And for especially the 72 hours to a week after a new moon, themes are introduced, subtle, unmistakable events happen that are tied to where that new moon is occurring. 2 weeks after that new moon, a full moon occurs in the opposite part of the chart, creating its own sort of tension. And then back to the next new moon again. Twice a year, we have solar eclipses. Twice a year, we have lunar eclipses. And they are aligned with each other. In other words, if we have a solar eclipse on January the 5th, we have a lunar eclipse on January the, is it 21st or so? Something like that. 31st? I can't remember, but the new moon solar eclipse and the full moon lunar eclipse follow each other, just as we're going to have a new moon solar eclipse on July the 2nd and a full moon lunar eclipse on July the 16th. And the eclipses are the most important astrological events in the year. And indeed are, I was going to say drumbeat, but they're not really a drumbeat. They're stronger and louder than that. They announce where a lot of our lives play out thematically at any given point in a year. Let's come back to the start of this video. If someone were to say 3 things, Abhi, convince me that astrology works, I would say pay attention to Mercury retrograde and how that makes you feel. Number 2, pay attention to new moons and full moons and see how they're affecting you astrologically or affecting you emotionally and energetically. What it feels like to align with the cycle of a new moon and a full moon, and what happens energetically around those times. And if you know your chart, even better, because you can actually see where the new moons and full moons are happening and really see where the correlation is occurring. And number 3, and this is more for the astrology aficionado, I find every day I look at my chart and I see where the moon is at. And also I have a printout of the lunar return chart that is applicable at any time, and I find that a large part of my life plays out where the moon is in my chart and in my lunar return. All a lunar return. When people talk about solar returns, and a solar return is your birthday. If the sun is at a certain point in your chart at the moment it was born, by the time it comes back to that part of a chart, it's called a solar return. It returns to that point. So if you were born on May the 31st of a particular year, the next year the sun will have gone on May the 31st, it'll come back to the same point in your chart. Solar return. Every time my moon, for example, is in Taurus, it's at about 12 degrees of Taurus. So every time the moon touches 12 degrees of Taurus, it meets up with the moon in my birth chart, where the moon was in a birth chart. And at that moment, a lunar return it's like my lunar birthday. It happens every 28 days. And at that point in time, a lunar return is a snapshot of the chart at that point in time, based on where you are. So if I'm living in Los Angeles right now, then the snapshot of the chart at that point in time is based on where the planets are at, on the date and at the time when the moon meets up at 12 degrees of Taurus with my natal moon. And that snapshot is my lunar return for the next 28 odd days. And where the moon is in my birth chart and where the moon is in my solar return chart. Sorry if I'm losing people here, but just bear with me. This is for the astrologically inclined or more astrologically advanced, is where a lot of my days play out energetically, I find. I can't make that up. So I hope this was useful and helpful. I hope that for people who are new to astrology and trying to find their bearings with it, and I'm trying to provide some anchors to my videos as well. I'm going to put a link to this particular video after every new moon and at the end of every new moon and full moon video I do for a while, so that if people want to understand new moons and full moons, generally speaking, and eclipses, they have a resource of somewhere they can go. And for people who are new to all this, we're starting to lose light here. For people who are new to all this, maybe the thing to do for now is just to align with or tune to or experiment with what new moons and full moons feel like for you. How do you feel before a new moon? How do you feel after a new moon? How do you feel around the time of a full moon? And if you do have a version of your chart with you and you can see where it is occurring, is there correlation between where it is that a new moon occurs and what transpires over the next 28 days? Or where it is that a full moon occurs and what happens around that time? And is there correlation between the energetic and emotional activities happening around that time and where the full moon or the new moon occurred? One interesting thing I will tell you, Monday, the days of the week, if you don't know, are named after the planets. Monday is the day of the moon. Tuesday is the day of Mars. Wednesday, the day of Mercury. Thursday, the day of Jupiter. Friday, the day of Venus. Saturday, the day of Saturn. Sunday, the day of the sun. Monday, being named after the moon, is considered to be kind of an emotionally up and down day. So it's always striking that Monday is considered the first day of the work week, because really, technically, or astrologically, or emotionally, or energetically, it's a terrible day to start the work week. The day of the moon is not when we want to be working. The day of the moon is the day of the moon. We are waxing and waning and up and down and all over the place. And so getting out of bed on Monday mornings is not fun for multiple reasons. Not only because we have to go to work, but because it's the day of the moon, and we'd much rather attune to our own emotional cycles on that day. Indeed, I would argue that Sunday and Monday are great weekend days, and Tuesday is a great day to get to work because it's the day of Mars. Mars is ready to work. Those of you who are in India and know the Hindi names of the weeks, I mean, Somvar, Mangalvar, Budhwar, the day of Mercury, Mangalvar, the day of Mars, literally named after the planets. Brihaspativar, day of Jupiter, Thursday. Shukravar, Venus, Friday. Shanivar, Saturday. And Ravivar, Sunday. So it's fascinating. Even hours of the day or certain segments of the day are assigned to certain planets and are considered good times to do work related to those planets. You don't have to go that crazy. All you need to do for now is to start to pay attention to when new moons and full moons occur, and start to pay attention to how you feel energetically. And if you know where they are occurring, so much the better. And the next two videos I will do will be eclipse related, so pay attention to those, because those will be important and are key content for our 2019 astrological event calendar. Okay. If you have any queries, or you'd like a reading, or you have questions, or whatever it is, I'm going to include my email address in the description area here. Please feel free to like if you find this content useful. Share the video, like it, comment on it, subscribe to my YouTube channel, click on the bell icon to be notified when I do new videos, and we'll take it from there, just as we lose light. All right, folks, more soon.